something that I think is really, really important because it's what we've been circling around for quite a while. And this, again, is not meant to say, see, this is the truth, not that. It's simply meant to show you that there's mountains of evidence that counter what they're trying to forcefully tell you is an absolute fact. There's also plenty of evidence to point to a couple of other things that I think might be possible. Bottom line is what they're telling you is simply not the case. And I think that has to be readily apparent right now. Now, here is something I want to show you to start. It looks like you can't, hold on, let me reframe that image real quick. Now this is, that's weird that it's off to the side here. Let me do that. This is a comment that somebody just shared. And as always, my intention is not to, it looks like I might just, I can just scroll it. It's okay. Now, anyway, the point is, yeah, there we go. Okay. I'm not trying to call this person out. Right? As much as that's essentially what's happening here. But the idea is not to say, look, this guy's whatever. The point is to say, look, this is something that's happening. And this is what I'm trying to show you guys. That these people, and this is not meant to say that this is what all of one group thinks. That's never the case. But there's a huge faction of people that think just like this, as we've been seeing. My video was talking about the fact, the China did it narrative is just completely unsubstantiated. As, by the way, the U.S. analysis itself says in their own information, it says that it's inconclusive, and yet they're arguing that I'm crazy for not saying it's a fact. That's irrational. But he said the only thing he is talking about all the time is where it started. Me. He's talking about me, which obviously that's not true. We talk about 1,000 things on this show, one of which is coronavirus, one of which within that topic is where it started. Talk about being reductive. But see, this is how you manipulate people's perceptions who don't want to go past the comment. But the only thing we're talking about is where it started. No, we talked about bioweapons. We talked about the fact that it could be fake. We talked about 5G. We talked about everything. But Merrick doesn't know that, or rather doesn't care to know it. But he said, which has zero importance. Who actually thinks that where it started, it has zero importance? I find that to be ridiculous. But here, I don't even think he actually feels that way, but here's his point. He's saying it has zero importance. Why does he say that? Because he doesn't care where it started. U.S. made or not, he says. Important for me is that China will be blamed. They are responsible for the West being effed because of cheap labor. If the U.S. created it to F China, so might it be. Okay, so do you realize what he's saying right there? Because of his opinions about what they've done in the past, which may be right or wrong. Right? I mean, let's just go ahead and realize that even the things he thinks that they might have done in the past could have been politically motivated and manipulated by the government who has a vested interest in lying about them. But that's neither here nor there because it doesn't matter. He has an opinion about them based on something in the past. But let's just go ahead and say he's got an opinion based on things that they've done. Because we know that China has been doing things to manipulate the U.S. and, they're in an economic war. So the point he's saying that he doesn't care about the facts of the data. He doesn't care about where it started. He doesn't care whether the U.S. made this. What's important for him is that China's blamed for it all because of what they've done before. Even if that means we're lying about it. They deserve it. I hope you guys can see what this is. Not everybody feels like this, but there are a lot of people that do. And they're the ones that are shouting you down. Not because they care about what's true or not, but because they've already decided that China deserves to be blamed. That's a pretty big thing to see, and it's happening everywhere right now. Now, here's the first big point. This is what we've been continually talking about in regard to this discussion. Yes, in regard to the origin part of this massive discussion. COVID-19 was already silently circulating in France before a virus arrived from China and Italy, according to their study. Okay, France being a staunch U.S. ally. One of the staunchest U.S. allies we're talking about here. So right off the bat, first of all, you could say, okay, well, the study could be mistaken, right? They could be influenced. They could be lying, which is always possible. And I think we always can acknowledge that. But the point is, this is a U.S. ally. So what are we talking about here? Whereas we're talking, there's so much evidence showing in the studies based on what they've found from mostly U.S. allies now that this was around before they claim it was even in December, even in November in many cases in China, which seems to counter the entire narrative. By the way, we've also shown numerous cases where in up to 4 months before this started, the Trump administration was aware of this, didn't do anything. We already have all kinds of weird nuanced things throughout this whole story, such as the fact that we showed to you, as a matter of fact, on this show, that the military was very aware that flu vaccines, in fact, complicated coronavirus issues. They knew this. They did a whole paper on this long before all this. Not COVID-19, not SARS-CoV-2, but coronaviruses in general. So the cold, SARS, MERS, all of it. They said in their own study that using flu vaccines made it worse. And yet they then went on to say, everybody get the flu vaccine because coronavirus. Remember that? The World Health Organization, the US government, they all said it. Explain that for me. Right? So you tell me that they didn't know that their own study was there? You tell me that the military didn't know this? Maybe there's an explanation for that, but I hope you will think about how obviously ridiculous that is. But we have all of these things standing out. France saying it was there before. I just think this is something that needs to really shake you. Now, the virologist at the Pasteur Institute, this is in Paris, they've sequenced the genomes from samples taken from 97 French and 3 Algerian coronavirus patients, and this is between January 24th and March 24th. 97. So it's not just some haphazard thing. I mean, realize, first of all, that the doctors that got censored on YouTube, they tested 5,000 different people, and that was censored. Now, they're reporting that their findings are clearly showing, as by the way, again, are numerous others, which I really want to accentuate for you, that numerous other allies are saying the same thing, and we're pretending like it doesn't matter. But if China comes out and says the same thing, oh, this was around before that. Oh, China propaganda. Well, what do you have to say about all the U.S. allies saying that? Oh, we just ignore that. Interesting. But they're saying, they're reporting that their findings were that the coronavirus outbreak in France is not connected to the cases imported from China or Italy. That's what they're saying. As another strain of the disease of unknown origin, they said, had already been infecting people in the country. Let me repeat that. Another strain of the disease of unknown origin had already been infecting people in the country before we noticed this was happening in China. Let that sink in. From France, from a U.S. ally. Now, if you were honest in an investigation, this would be something you would consider as the U.S. investigating, as opposed to just saying, we need to look in the Wuhan lab. That's the only thing we need to see because that's where it came from. I'm going to touch on that again in a moment too. But the idea, when if you're calling to look to the one place that you want to see so you can find evidence, that's confirmation bias. You're going to look and find what you want to find. If you were doing a broad investigation of all these locations and one of them was the Wuhan, that's different. That's not what's happening. That's not an investigation when all you want to do is see the one place that you've already called out and that you've already said is guilty. That's not an investigation. That's making happen what you want to happen, as they've done 100 times before this. Another strain of the disease of unknown origin had already been infecting people. They found that the dominant types of COVID-19, the viral strains in France, clearly differed from those that arrived from China or Italy, and actually belonged to another group or clade, they said, which is just another term for the group, like another cluster kind of a thing, right? Now, the virologist published, and this is actually, let me grab the paper for you guys so you can see it. Here you go. And by the way, as always, all these will be in the show notes when I'm done, so I hope you will read this stuff for yourself. They published this on RxIV. But it's not yet been peer reviewed. That's important. But there's a lot out there that hasn't been peer reviewed. You have to understand how politicized science is today. Not being peer reviewed definitely means something, but that doesn't mean you should dismiss it. Because there are things such as the early on, I believe it was an Indian study about the HIV being present in this COVID-19. And remember when they were politically forced to back down and they pulled it back. Well, now we've got a bunch of other studies showing the same thing, right? The point is politics plays a huge factor, just like we showed you a million times on this show, that there's clearly, just like we talked about with Eisenhower warning about this, a scientific political elite that is now driving policy based on politics, not science. That's alarming. But just recognize that not being peer reviewed is not something that means that you should just ignore it. Now it says, quote, we can infer, which, deduce, conclude from the evidence, not the same as It infers, meaning you looked at the evidence and came to these conclusions based on evidence, not a suggestion, right? But it says we can infer that the virus was silently circulating in France in February, prior to the wave of COVID-19 cases in the country. That's a direct quote. Now, what I find very interesting is that the origins of this third strain were apparently unknown to scientists. Unknown, right? So now we have an unknown location for this other part that they can't figure out where it came from. And then they don't even understand the third strain. Meanwhile, they're proving by their data that this in fact happened before we were told, and that the strain that they're dealing with in France predominantly did not come from China. Now, you can dismiss this all you want and just ignore it if you choose, but you should, being a discerning adult, look at it, research it, ask yourself, could this be accurate? Seeing as how there's far more studies and information now saying this than the one or a couple that they're pointing to, like the one from Nature that says this is not man-made, or this is, not manipulated. That's what they keep pointing to. That one Nature study that says at the end, no, this is not man-made. This is completely organic. Everything else seems to be suggesting otherwise. Not to say that this study is doing that, but I'm saying that there's multiple studies countering the narrative, and they just choose to ignore it, cherry picking their data. It's kind of interesting, wouldn't you say? But it's happening everywhere. I mean, everywhere.